After literally years of stonewalling, the FBI has finally come clean with facts and information related to the Seth Rich laptop. I'm delighted to be joined by attorney Ty Clevenger. Ty, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
You know, you are a person I've been aware of for quite a while, but we've actually just come into communication last night. I'm really excited to hear what you've learned from this FOIA lawsuit that has finally borne fruit. What can you tell us about what's going on and what you've learned?
Well, the FBI's attorney intimated a couple of months ago that they were going to be producing some documents, which was significant because I had filed, actually several years ago, I filed a FOIA lawsuit in my own name to get records out of the FBI. And an FBI section chief submitted a sworn declaration to the court saying that they had searched all of the FBI's index systems and could not find anything about Seth Rich. And I pushed the court to order them to produce more. Court didn't back me up, and so the FBI said we had nothing, and that was the end of it. So information began to leak out. Actually, Michael Isikoff, ironically, with Yahoo News, who has done his dead level best to bury this story and call it a conspiracy theory and discredit anybody who asks questions about Seth Rich, interviewed the former prosecutor who was assigned to Seth's case, the murder case, and she let some things slip. Basically, that the FBI had taken custody of Seth's laptop, which was huge. It wasn't clear from what she said in this interview whether they still had the laptop or what they extracted from the laptop, but it was clear at that point that the FBI had at least some records that they had refused to give me. So in some separate litigation, I took Deborah Sines' deposition, and she admitted under oath that, yes, she had been interviewed by the FBI. She had initiated contact with the special counsel's office, Robert Mueller's office, and she had met with an attorney and an FBI agent from his staff. And so at that point, we knew unequivocally that the FBI had records. So another friend of mine in Texas who was interested in the story filed a new FOIA request with the FBI, and we sued on his behalf this past summer. And now the FBI is kind of backed into a corner and is having to admit that, yes, they've got the records. So the big news yesterday was that the attorney representing the FBI acknowledged that the FBI has somewhere in the neighborhood of 20,000 records on Seth Rich, plus they still currently have possession of his laptop. So that's a pretty big admission on the part of the FBI.
And that was the Brian Huddleston FOIA suit, is that right?
That's right.
And so you've released a trove of documents on your law flog, which is getting flogged itself. People are so interested in this information, we can't even get to the website. I love that name. It seems almost a send-up of Ben Whitty's Lawfare blog. Is that something you had in mind when you named that?
Actually, no. I think I had my blog up before he had his up.
So. So he's stealing your idea. Even better.
Maybe so.
So can you give us an overview of the types of, it's so much information you probably haven't even had a chance to dive into it yet.
Well, actually, they've not produced the records yet. They just told us what they have kind of in a global sense. So we don't know the specifics yet. But the fact that they still have Seth's laptop tells us some things, one of which is the investigation, whatever kind of investigation it is still ongoing. Because if the investigation was closed, they would have returned the laptop.
Wow.
So a couple of possibilities there. FBI has denied all along that it played any role in investigating the murder. That may well be true, although misleading. I think at the very least, they must be investigating this either as a counterintelligence matter or as a computer crime, which, if Seth was the source of the 2016 DNC email leaks published on WikiLeaks, then either would apply. It could be a counterintelligence investigation, or it could be a computer crimes investigation.
Let me stop you for a second, because
Sure.
it is quite unusual for the FBI to become involved in a murder investigation unless the individual is a federal employee or it somehow involves crossing state lines or something like that, right?
Right. And one of the Metropolitan Police in Washington, D.C., have always said their theory is that he was killed in a botched robbery. Well, if it was just a botched robbery, then they're right. The FBI would not be investigating a street crime in Washington, D.C. So
Right.
that's a valid point. But then that begs the question, okay, so he has been murdered. It's the FBI and not the MPD that has his laptop. So why is that? That would suggest that possibly this is something more than just a random botched robbery. Could it be a coincidence? Maybe, but that seems pretty unlikely.
It's
The other thing, I would say this, as an ex-cop, I found it almost impossible to believe that, or I do find it impossible to believe that MPD and the FBI are not coordinating their investigation, because I know enough about the case, some of which I cannot disclose publicly, but I know enough to say that there is definite overlap between the computer communications issue and the murder investigations. So I have to think there's some kind of cross communication between the two agencies.
What is going on at the FBI? I mean, it's like the laptop roach motel. Laptops go in, but none come out. And how long does it take them to conduct an investigation? It seems like 4 years is a lot of time.
Well, I think, I've joked that Seth Rich's laptop has been sitting on the same shelf as Hunter Biden's laptop.
Right.
They just, they stick it there and hope they don't have to investigate. I do think they've been deliberately stonewalling, clearly, denying that they had records. And I think it's obvious that they were lying about that. So that begs the question, why? And there's been a lot of speculation. I've heard rumors that Andrew McCabe gave the order to keep Seth Rich matters outside of the FBI's indexing system. Now, I don't know if it was McCabe or somebody else, but it appears that somebody did do that. The reason that's significant is because whenever you make a FOIA request to the FBI, they don't search all of their emails or all of their records system-wide. They have this separate index that they maintain where the agents have the discretion to enter records and link it to a name or a subject matter. And then they only search that index. Well, it's very obvious. If you want to keep something from being discovered in a FOIA search, you just don't put it in the index. And that seems to be exactly what happened here. They just deliberately kept it out of the index. And the reason I think this is a much broader import is if we can prove that, then this will prove what I've been saying for some time, that the FBI systemically plays this game. And if they don't want to provide records about something, they just leave it out of the index. And so you can file your FOIA requests all day long, and the lackeys on the clerical side will look in the index and it's not there, and that's the end of it. And the courts say consistently that the index search is sufficient. And so what I'm hoping to prove is a sidebar in this case that no, as a matter of fact, these index searches are not sufficient, and that there's been bad faith on the part of the FBI in keeping matters out of the index.
Wow. It's really unbelievable to see the amount of impropriety at the FBI and the lack of discipline. It's really a rogue agency at this point.
It is. I mean, you may have seen the story that came out today. The AP did its own little investigation and found 5 instances in the last 5 years where senior FBI personnel were involved in sexual misconduct. And some of it's serious sexual misconduct. Not a one of them was disciplined. And that's actually been the complaint about the FBI going back in the 90s when Louis Freeh was in charge, that if you're a headquarters supervisor in DC, you can do all kinds of shady, even illegal things. And the Bureau is going to cover up for you. But if you're, a line agent in Iowa somewhere, and you use an FBI car to pick up your kid from school, you'll get busted for it. And so that's long been the reputation that the FBI maintains double standards. And I think the closer you get to FBI headquarters, the more that's true.
Wow. And for people who don't know, Louis Freeh was the FBI director who came in after Bill Clinton fired William Sessions, the first time in history that a U.S. president fired an FBI director one night before Vince Foster's body was discovered in Fort Marcy Park. So a lot of questions about really the FBI in general. I think it's possible that William Sessions might have been the only FBI director we've ever had who wasn't corrupt, which may explain why he was fired by Bill Clinton.
Possibly so, yeah. Yeah, Clinton tried to get rid of everybody, all the assistant U.S. attorneys, anybody who might potentially investigate him.
Right. Now, another thing that people who have been following the Seth Rich story are very aware of was this appearance by Julian Assange on, I think it was Dutch television, where a lot of people feel Assange basically said that Seth Rich was the source for WikiLeaks. Although he doesn't quite come out and say that, and Julian Assange is now, of course, in Belmarsh prison. There was a story a while ago, maybe about a year ago, that Seth Rich's brother was attempting to depose Julian Assange. Do you know if anything ever happened with that?
Actually, yeah, earlier in the year, my client, Ed Butowski, and Aaron Rich, actually all the parties in the case in D.C., asked the court to permit the deposition of Assange, which is pretty unusual because not only did you have all the parties requesting the same deposition, but all the parties agreed that the deposition was not only relevant, but it was necessary. It was very important for the case. And the judge assigned to the case denied that request anyway.
Wow.
Why? The judge is, well, good question. I got in trouble for pointing out the fact that the judge, Richard Leon, is a longtime personal friend of John Podesta, who was up to his eyeball. The Russian collusion stuff, the WikiLeaks stuff. So Judge Leon doesn't like me talking about that. Judge Leon's even made some threats, and I'm getting ready to file a judicial misconduct complaint against him. But yeah, so there's a lot of shady stuff going on around this case. So, but anyway, so you had all the parties wanting to get Assange's deposition. Judge Leon said no. Then in a separate case, the Joel and Mary Rich case in New York, the court did permit or did agree to request a deposition of Julian Assange. Unfortunately, the New York case settled when Fox News coerced all the other defendants into settling the case and making it go away. Wish I could say more about that, but I did say some things about it on my blog. I talked about Fox's behind-the-scenes treachery, and hopefully that will all be exposed at some
definitely
point.
Interested in hearing about that. That case involved Rod Wheeler, Maria Zimmerman, right? Is that the one?
Right, Maria Zimmerman, Ed Butowski. So that there won't be a deposition of Assange in that case, but there is still the possibility that the parties in the D.C. case in front of Judge Leon will ask him again to permit the deposition of Assange. Of course, what he does, what he will do, who knows. But the handling of the case in D.C. has been very strange.
Is Judge Leon the guy who has like a weird Tiffany lamp on his bench?
I don't remember. I've actually never been in his courtroom.
Whoa, wait a minute. As I look at this picture of him, take a look at his eyebrows. You laugh, but this is the type of detail that I notice because there are a number of, what is William Barr's father's name?
I do not know.
He was the headmaster at Donald Barr, right? He was the headmaster at Dalton, and he left just shortly before Jeffrey Epstein was brought in as a teacher there. Donald Barr. There's a very bizarre picture of him I'm trying to locate. Here it is. So he's, now this might be a little bit too low resolution for us to see, but in this picture of Donald Barr, we can see he's got a similar kind of thing going on with his eyebrows.
Yeah, weird.
He's got 6 pens in his pocket. And a viewer of Crowdsource the Truth pointed out that they're separated by a divider and that this is actually an indication of 33. I'm not trying to get weird on you here, Ty, but I find that the number 33 is often inserted into newspaper articles and things like that, almost as a coded message for people who understand that code. It's a little wink saying, hey, we got this. So I'm curious to see. I did not know that Judge Leon was personal friends with John Podesta. And, you know, we start to put together these pictures. Does that upturned eyebrow send a signal to somebody who knows, okay, this is one of our guys or something like that? We don't know.
No idea about that.
Yeah. Speculating, of course. And I know that as a lawyer and a former police officer, you like to deal in facts and evidence, not moods and speculation. But there's so many weird things about this case. It's when do we expect, or do we expect, that the FBI will actually release this information?
Well, the court set a deadline for December 28th. The FBI says they can't make that deadline because there's so many documents. And actually, that's not unusual in a FOIA case for the government to come back and say, you know, we need more time, we need more time. So that doesn't really raise eyebrows with me. They've asked, though, to have it extended into early March. Pardon me, I thought I had turned my phone off here.
Speaking of raising eyebrows, members of the chat are pointing out that Michael Aquino has perhaps the most pronounced version of this bizarre eyebrow thing happening.
Yeah, so...
not unusual for it to take a long time for a FOIA request to be fulfilled.
Yeah, not that uncommon. So that in and of itself doesn't concern me. They said they'll have it done by the first part of March, entirely done. And in the interim, they have tentatively agreed to make rolling productions, which is reasonable. I told them, you know, give me the Seth Rich stuff first, you know, as it becomes available. So that's the tentative agreement with the FBI.
And have you seen really any difference at all? I mean, this case began before Christopher Wray came in as FBI director. A lot of people seem to think it's really not much different under him, sort of more of the same.
Yeah, that's certainly been my experience. I don't think the FBI has changed at all. You know, I think Christopher Wray is probably a little smoother and a little smarter than James Comey, who was kind of a reckless goofball as director. But substantively, you know, the FBI seems to be as corrupt as it ever was.
Yeah, it's troubling for most people because, I mean, I've contacted the FBI when I needed some help and they didn't do anything. They can't seem to investigate a Hunter Biden laptop. I mean, we almost could make an open source FBI. I don't know, you know, who would provide the Legos, of course, but it seems like the public on the internet is doing a better job of investigating some of these crimes than the actual intelligence agencies that are supposed to be doing it.
Yeah, it definitely seems that way. You know, there are even former law enforcement officers and some current law enforcement officers who are involved in that effort on an ad hoc basis, you know, who, even in some of my cases, give me tips, you know, give me suggestions, pointers, places to look, that sort of thing. And I can tell you, because you know, as an ex-cop, I know a lot of cops. The FBI's standing among other law enforcement officers is pretty low these days, very low. Yeah. I mean, they've always had a reputation for being showboats, but the last 4 years, now they have a reputation for just being plain dirty.
Right. I guess that reputation for being showboats is among law enforcement officers because the self-projected reputation is that they're the finest law enforcement agency in the world.
Yeah.
I can't remember the last time the FBI did anything. On 9/11, we heard how the FBI failed to, you know, they knew that these terrorists were around but didn't do anything. I mean, that seems to be what they always say. Somebody shoots up a shopping mall or a movie theater, or even in the case of JFK, they said, well, they knew this guy, but why didn't they do anything? This is a real serious problem.
When I was a local cop, I learned there's an old joke that goes around, different variations of it. If you want to catch a fugitive, you call the U.S. Marshals. If you want to catch a counterfeiter, you call the Secret Service. And if you want to hold a press conference, you call the FBI.
Right. Yeah. Where was it that you were a police officer?
I was a deputy sheriff in Camp County, Texas.
Ooh. Now, there's been a lot of problems with the sheriffs here in New York, and there's a lot of differences with how sheriffs operate in different counties. I think most people expect the sheriffs are there to uphold the Constitution, but here in New York, they seem to be just doing whatever the governor tells them to do. Ty, a lot of people are feeling helpless right now. You are one of these lawyers who's out there. You're not doing this for money. I mean, these FOIA cases, nobody's going to win any money. You're trying to get to the bottom of this.
Right. Yeah. If it's any consolation, I share the same discouragement because, the longer I dig into this and realize how few people are willing to stand up to do the right thing, it does become discouraging. And I'm just not just talking about government people, but I was just talking with another journalist here a couple of hours ago about how frustrating it is. Most people in journalism don't want to touch this stuff, won't go anywhere near it. In the case of the Hunter Biden story, the mainstream journalists actively suppressed the story, tried to discredit the New York Post, and now we know the New York Post was spot on.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the term journalism has become quite tainted because there are people who are basically disinformation operatives and working for newspapers and stuff. Now, if I'm asking you about an active case or anything that you can't discuss, feel free to say that. We know that you're an attorney and we can't get into any privileged information. You've mentioned that Ed Butowski is one of your clients, but is it in this Rich v. Butowski that you're representing him?
Actually, I am not representing Mr. Butowski there. Eden Quainton is the attorney. I represented Ed on some matters in Texas. And so Eden and I would share notes because some of the information was related, but I'm not a part of the DC case.
It's been going on for a long time, 2 years or more. We've got all these items in the docket here, things under seal. It seems kind of strange to me that Aaron Rich is involved in all these lawsuits. Do you have a sense of what the purpose is of these lawsuits?
Yeah, I think he wants to shut people up. I think they've actually been pretty candid about that. Certainly in his parents' case, and the ironic, really shocking thing to me was some journalists, and I can't remember exactly which ones were kind of not mad. These were more mainstream journalists who were kind of boasting about this strategy, supposedly to suppress conspiracy theories by suing people into silence. And so Joel and Mary were a little more candid about that being their objective with Fox. And then Aaron originally sued the Washington Times. So originally the Washington Times was a co-defendant with Ed Butowski and Matt Couch in the case that you just pulled up there.
Right.
And Aaron very successfully shut them up. The Washington Times buckled its knees, and we don't know what was in their settlement agreement, but the Washington Times has never written a single word about Seth Rich since that settlement.
Wow.
So it's a pretty effective strategy. They're not only have they shut down the mainstream media coverage, they're successfully bullying conservative publications into dropping the story.
But Ty, isn't this weird? I mean, you would think if a family member was murdered and the cops didn't solve it and the FBI was dragging its feet, wouldn't the family want journalists to talk about it, to get to the bottom of it? And
it is very, very bizarre to me. I mean, I have my own suspicions about the Rich family, and I want to be careful about what I say.
They're very litigious.
Well, it's not because of that. I want to be fair. I don't want to minimize the loss of a family member to a murderer. I mean, that's an awful thing. But all that said, um, yeah, their response to this whole situation has been really bizarre to
Right.
me, and I won't pretend to fully understand it.
Hmm.
Sometimes I wonder, and I certainly can't exclude the possibility that they are under some kind of coercion, and they've been, one I think possible scenario is if a family member like Aaron had any involvement in the transfer of the emails. I'm just saying if, well, then potentially that could subject him to criminal liability. And the reason I bring that up is because Aaron's lawyers have brought it up repeatedly and said, "Oh, you're accusing our client of a crime. You're accusing our client of a crime." Well, if that's true and you're so reactionary about it, then I have to wonder: did somebody say, "Look, Aaron's got some exposure here, and either you guys are going to play along with the script, I mean, the family is going to play along with this script, or Aaron could have some problems." I don't know, but uh, the way the family has reacted for the last 4 years is very, very strange.
Hmm. Well, and certainly if someone did murder Seth, that same somebody could be threatening the family, and under the threat of death, people might do strange things. But I mean, they're so active in trying to suppress any information about this. It is very bizarre. And of course, I mean, this is a case I haven't really thought about or looked at for quite a while. Number of strange things. Rod Wheeler told us, the retired Metro DC detective who was hired by Ed Butowski to investigate this. Can you speak about that at all? Why would Ed Butowski, a third party who has nothing to do with the Rich family, it's not like he's like Uncle Ed or something, why is he paying a private investigator to investigate this murder? That's strange.
Well, Ed's testimony on this, or statements, have consistently been that he got involved only because Ellen Ratner contacted him. Ellen had been to Europe. She had stopped in London to visit with Julian Assange. And Ed's statement on this was that when Ratner got back to the U.S., she reached out to Ed and was urging Ed to convey a message to the Rich family from Julian Assange. The message being that that Seth was a source, or the source of the DNC emails provided to WikiLeaks. Ed has stood by that story consistently, and then there's corroborating evidence for that. He's got text messages with Julian Assange where he doesn't mention Seth by name. He's got text messages with Ellen Ratner where he does not mention Seth by name, but in the text message, he's encouraging Ellen Ratner, when is she going to make this information public? And when is she going to say something? So it's pretty clear from the context that they're talking about the conversation she had with Assange. And then there's a YouTube video where Ellen Ratner was, and I forget what school, but it was at a college, was being interviewed on a public stage, and said she had been to Europe and had visited with Julian Assange. And Julian Assange said that the DNC emails came from an internal source, not the Russians. So that's public record. So Ellen Ratner, according to Ed, was pushing him to reach out to the Rich family because Ed knows a ton of people. And so he finally did reach out to the Rich family. And according to Ed, the Riches said they didn't have the resources to hire a private investigator. So Ed offered to help him, and he did.
And
At
of
least
course,
he thought he was helping.
He thought he was helping them, because that turned into a whole lot of lawsuits for him.
Yeah.
And isn't it also true that Ellen Ratner is the sister of the now deceased Michael Ratner, who was the attorney for WikiLeaks?
Right, exactly.
I mean, it's like so many twists and turns and strange relationships and people doing things that seem to be the opposite of what you would expect anybody in any of these situations to do. It's got to be one of the strangest cases of your career.
It is. It's very bizarre. It's hard to know from one minute to the next who you can trust and who you can't.
Right. So the lawsuit between the Rich family and Ed Butowski, it's been settled, or that's ongoing? That was the Fox News thing.
Right. That one has been settled. And can't say too much about that, except I'll say that Fox should be ashamed of itself in the way that in the skullduggery that Fox was pulling behind the scenes.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, this is all stuff that seems to have, it was a big story and filling the news cycle at one time. This actually just was settled a few weeks ago. I heard about it, but hadn't given it much thought. And this case is so closely tied to the Trump presidency. Is it a coincidence that it's all being settled now that the news media?
Let me interrupt you just a second. Just a second before you stop scrolling. That top where you were. So just leave it where you were. Yeah, the bottom paragraph now. Last sentence in that bottom paragraph. This is from Joel and Mary Rich. We are pleased with the settlement of this matter and sincerely hope that the media will take genuine caution in the future. I mean, that's been the objective of all these lawsuits, to shut everybody up.
It's interesting, Ty, because I'm not sure if you've been following this, but New York has recently instituted an extremely powerful new anti-SLAPP statute. SLAPP, for people who don't know, is a strategic lawsuit against public participation. And New York has gone from essentially worst to first. The previous anti-SLAPP in New York was only for people who had, applied for certain types of petitions for public speaking and things like this. But this new anti-SLAPP law, basically, it will now extend far more broadly to lawsuits based upon any communication in a public place, open to the public, or a public forum in connection with an issue of public interest, or based upon any other lawful conduct in furtherance of the exercise of the constitutional right of free speech in connection with an issue of public interest. So this new version of New York's anti-SLAPP law is essentially geared towards protecting journalists from the type of abusive, lawfare kind of activity that you're talking about, which, as you've described, the Rich family and maybe Fox News and others are basically relishing their ability to do that.
Well, the problem with some of these anti-SLAPP statutes is they generally don't apply, at least significant portions of them don't apply in federal court. So all the expedited procedures that you have for dismissing a frivolous case do not exist in federal court. So, for example, even in the District of Columbia, which has a pretty good statute, because Aaron filed his case in federal court, then Ed Butowski and the Washington Times and Matt Couch were not able to take advantage of that statute.
Wow. So what did the court say when they tried? They're just like, sorry, that's a state statute, doesn't apply federally?
Well, there's a big distinction between substantive law and procedural law. And if you're in federal court, state substantive law applies, but state procedural law does not apply. And so most courts have interpreted these anti-SLAPP statutes as procedural rather than substantive, and therefore it doesn't apply.
Wow. Well, that's a disappointment for sure. I seem to remember seeing, yes, this article right here does address that very concern. And I mean, again, this would only apply to cases that are in New York, but this particular attorney who wrote this article, which is, of course, this attorney's interpretation of the statute, says, although this anti-SLAPP law constitutes state-level legislation, as you're saying, it's not yet clear how the new anti-SLAPP will fare in federal court. The First and Ninth Circuits have held that state-level anti-SLAPP laws are applicable in federal actions, while the D.C. Circuit, as you point out, the Fifth Circuit and the 11th Circuit have rejected the use of state anti-SLAPP laws. So the Second Circuit it's most likely to be tested, and also recently rejected the application for portions of it. But I think that was prior to the November 20th modifications signed into law by, of all people, Andrew Cuomo.
Right.
But we'll see what happens with this anti-SLAPP in New York here in federal court. I'm hopeful that it will have some power, because it actually applies to some of the vexatious lawsuits that have been brought against me. I know you have limited time with me tonight here, Ty. Is there anything else you think we should talk about, or we really need to wait until some of these FOIA documents come out and you get a chance to review them?
Yeah, that's all I know is they're coming. I don't know what's in them yet, so there's not a lot I can offer in terms of insight. But the fact that they've admitted that they exist is pretty significant in its own right.
Mm. And certainly, if you or I or Michael Flynn or anybody were to lie to the FBI, the consequences could be jail. At very least, it could be all your money, public smearing, being dragged through court for several years. But if the FBI lies to you, I believe that's called TS, as they say in New York. Tough stuff.
Yeah.
Why
they do
is
it all
that?
the time.
But I mean, shouldn't there be some sort of repercussion if, I really, and I don't know how we could affect this change, but I really would like to see a situation where people who are officers of the court, lawyers, judges, and people who are law enforcement officers, there really should be a stricter punishment when those individuals break the law, because they're educated in the law, they're supposed to uphold the law. I mean, a random person walking down the street could potentially break a law without even knowing it. Even the types of things that, let's say, Jerome Corsi or Michael Flynn said to the FBI might not, it could be a gray area of if they were lying or not, if they understood it was breaking the law. But yet we seem to have no power, even though this is supposed to be a nation by the people, for the people, and of the people. It seems like we're just getting pushed around.
Well, before I sign out, I'll give you an interesting little tidbit. Almost every tiny little podunk police department and sheriff's department in this country has videotaping capabilities. Most of the officers now, even in my old sheriff's department in rural Texas, has little video cameras that each officer wears to every encounter. That is standard operating procedure almost everywhere. Right. One of the exceptions is the FBI. The FBI, when it does interviews, uses the infamous 302 form, which was used on Michael Flynn, where somebody takes rough notes in the field and then later types those notes up and submits those. Could the FBI audio or video record its interviews? Well, of course they could. But yet they choose not to do that. And what we've discovered in Michael Flynn's case and some others is that they mysteriously lose the original notes or lose the original 302 form, and things get moved around and things get changed. I mean, it is such an extraordinary avenue of abuse. Yeah. And Congress ought to deal with that yesterday. But for whatever reason, they haven't.
Really unbelievable to me as well that the FBI can just write down whatever they want. Well, Ty, I want to thank you for joining me tonight, and I'm glad that you and I have finally connected, because I think there's so much for us to discuss. I look forward to having you back in the future, and people are going to want to check out Law Flog. It's, as we said earlier, currently either under a DDoS attack, or perhaps so many people are interested in these documents that it's just more requests than the website can handle. We'll keep our eyes on this, but Ty, thanks very much for joining me tonight.
You bet.
And happy holidays to you if I don't speak to you before then.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for watching. That was my guest, lawyer Ty Clevenger. And remember everybody, I can't bring you amazing guests like Ty Clevenger without your support and sponsorship. So please visit subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and become a sponsor. Thanks everybody for watching.